Joining us on the show tonight, ESPN's college football senior sports writer, Chris Lowe. Joining us, Chris. Appreciate you joining us, man. How's everything doing?
It's great to be with you, Dave. Everything's going great. It's hard to believe we're coming up on conference championship weekend, postseason, and like they were kicking it off yesterday.
Oh, absolutely. So you speak of that, feels like the season, it feels like November always gets here and we're like, man, it's conference championship game. Then we're talking bowl games. But just what's your thoughts on the 2023 SEC season overall, just now that it's over and we just got the weekend of the SEC championship game left?
I didn't think that Georgia would drop off much this year. I know some people thought they might, but I thought, Kirby has recruited and developed players so well there. And, I thought, Dave, honestly, that the biggest loss for Georgia might be Todd Monken leaving his OC and going to the NFL because he'd done such a super job there the last couple of years. But, boy, Mike Bobo, who I saw today is a finalist for the Broyles Award, has stepped right in, and they haven't missed a beat on offense. And he's had to deal with injuries. He had a first-year starter at quarterback, Carson Beck, who, by the way, is playing lights out right now. And yet they've been as balanced and been able to mix it up as well as anybody. So in a lot of ways, Georgia's maybe been even better than I thought. I never thought they would drop off dramatically. I say the other thing is I thought LSU would be more complete. Now, they haven't had a bad year, but they just were defensively. They've wasted a Heisman-like season from Jayden Daniels. They just haven't been able to stop people when they needed to, certainly in big games. And so that would be the other thing. And I think Alabama's transformation from where they were against Texas. Texas comes into their place and beats them by 10. The next week, they just look probably about as bad as I remember a Nick Saban team looking on offense against South Florida. Everybody's wondering who the quarterback is. Well, now, 10, 11 weeks later, Jalen Milroe's playing lights out and looking like one of these guys who's, we've talked about over the years, like a Tim Tebow, like a Cam Newton, guys who can run and pass. And here they are with a chance to win another SEC title and potentially play for a national title. So those would probably be the three things. And I think at A&M, I really thought that they would be much improved from what they were in 22. I thought Jimbo Fisher, with the way he's recruited and they felt really good about Connor Wigman. I like the fact that he brought in Bobby Petrino. I still think Bobby's a really good play caller. But having to play three quarterbacks again and losing close games and not being able to win on the road, it finally caught up with Jimbo. And now A&M makes a move. Jimbo's counting his money, $77 million worth. And Mike Elko is in College Station trying to get it right.
Staying on the topic, A&M, you brought it up. What's your thoughts on the Mike Elko hire? You like the floor? You think there's a high ceiling? What's your overall thoughts just initially? We're 24 hours into this.
I've always sort of grimaced or cringed when I've heard people say, well, such won the press conference, or this guy's a sexy hire. He's got swag. To me, you've got to bring in someone that's going to be able to galvanize the program. And especially now, Dave, been able to come in pretty quickly and manage the roster with players coming and going and talk the guys in that you feel like, and the staying that you feel like fit into what you want to do, and then go find other guys in the portal and piece it together. And you got signing days. So, Mike he knows that program. He worked there for 4 years. He's done a terrific job at Duke. I mean, an academically elite school that, David Cutcliffe had a lot of success there, but you look at Duke over the last 40 years in football, it's been a tough sledding, and yet he was able to win there and win some big games and beat teams like Clemson. Duke should never be Clemson. When you look at the way those two schools recruit and the rosters, and yet he was able to do that this year. So he's proven he can go to a place like that and win. Now, hey, the SEC is the octagon when it comes to recruiting and playing and everything that it takes to win. And we know that he better win within a couple of years at A&M, or we'll have a similar type narrative going on as we did with Jimbo. Jimbo got 6 years. The thing with Jimbo was in 2020, I thought he got a little bit of a, bad luck. They were right there on the cusp of going to the playoff in the COVID year. And Notre Dame gets in over Texas A&M, and it just never really was the same for A&M after that. And I think coming off a losing season last year, he really needed to beat some teams that counted this year, and they just weren't able to do that.
Staying on the coaching change here, we just talked about Mike Elko taking over at Texas A&M. What's your thoughts on Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State? Good fit there, young, exciting guy, offensive guy in a place that's probably not going to win championships on a regular basis. So you got to entertain people, I think, more with an exciting product. What's your thoughts?
Well, all those things you just said, Jeff's been around really explosive, creative, entertaining offenses every step of the way. Going back to his father-in-law, Art Briles, he was with Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, Josh Heupel at UCF. I really like the fact that Jeff is a quarterback guy, and especially now with the way the game's played, I think it's important to have a head coach who has coached quarterbacks, who's developed quarterbacks, who understands what he's looking for in a quarterback. And I guarantee you right there at the top of Jeff's list is finding a quarterback in the portal, recruiting, probably both. I think they've got to have a couple guys. I do think the fact that he comes in, he's got a lot of energy. I know he was hungry. He wanted a head coaching job, but he hasn't been a head coach. And sometimes the SEC, as you know, learning on the job is not the easiest thing to do as a head coach. When you haven't been one and you come into the SEC, that learning curve can be pretty steep. So we'll find out all the decisions, that he has to make as a head coach, the things that were on his plate as a coordinator are now on his plate. Jeff's a smart dude. He'll surround himself with good people. I guarantee you he'll bring in somebody, a couple of people right around him, not necessarily position coaches, but guys who are, associate ADs for football administration, ops guys that can help take some of the pressure off of him, because I do think he's going to call his own plays there, which to me is smart because that's one of the things he does best. And I always hate it when coaches who have a strength get away from it. I think Jeff's going to continue to call plays, but also think he's smart enough to know that he's going to have some people around him to help him do some of the things that he's not able to do as a head coach, especially being in that role as the main play caller.
Absolutely. So staying on this season, again, 5 days, we have a massive one in Atlanta, almost a quarterfinal game, some may call it, going into the college football playoff this year. That is the SEC championship, Alabama, Georgia. What are your initial thoughts? Just 5 days out, what are some keys to victory you're looking forward to seeing, maybe an X factor as we head into Saturday's championship matchup?
I'd start at third down. Georgia's been phenomenal on third down this year, both sides, offensively and defensively. They've, as Carson Beck has settled into his rhythm, and again, I go back to what Mike Bobo has done in calling plays. They've been automatic almost on third down, and on defense, they'll never allow you to convert on third down. And so, can Alabama get manageable down in distances? I think having Milroe, a guy in breakdown situations who can scramble and can extend plays and sort of make something out of nothing. He's gotten better and better at that. Helps Alabama. They've got to stay out of turning the ball over, which Milroe, you go back to the South Florida game where he didn't play. Since that game, I think he's got like 26, or he's counted for 25 or 26 touchdowns and only 5 turnovers. So he's playing at an elite level right now. And they're going to need that kind of performance for him, and they're going to have to protect him. They're really going to – this will probably – if Bama's going to win this game, they're going to have to play the best they've played all year up front offensively, and maybe generate some turnovers on defense. Georgia's a better team. I really believe that. Alabama, though, is playing right now with the kind of confidence, and they've won 5 games where they've been behind in the second half and come back. And I tell you, money games, I know he's been around for a while, and everybody said earlier this year that maybe Nick Saban had lost his fastball. I don't think so. I think in these types of games, he's at his best.
Chris, I think what you bring up too is Jalen Milroe is a perfect example. It seems to me there's some games he's a little hesitant taking off on runs, and you got the LSU game. And again, I know LSU's defense is not great this year, but it seems that there was a little bit more confidence in my ability to take off. Feels like Saturday in Auburn this past weekend. There were times he was a little hesitant. You could tell him he would go back behind the line of scrimmage, get the illegal forward pass penalty at times. I'm with you. I think this week he's going to have to be able to utilize his legs, and even utilize him in a design run game. Tommy Rees is going to incorporate him in that as well. I think.
And they put and Tommy's done a good job of adding some of that stuff, and they really built it around. I shouldn't say built it. They've tweaked it around what he does best. And Jalen's gotten better in the pocket. He's more decisive in the pocket when to throw it. Nick Saban mentioned Saturday. I was in Auburn after the game. There were at least twice, maybe 3 times, where he could have run for, 10, 12, 15 yards and threw it. And one of those, as you pointed out, was when he was past the line of scrimmage. So, those types of things, when you got a chance to make big plays on third down against this defense, the way Georgia is just so good on that down. I can't emphasize that enough, man. When you're been as staunch as they have on third down defensively, as good as they are and as deep, and they're not as deep as they were the last 2 years because, gosh, they've lost tons of defensive players to the pros, but they're still really good. And I think Alabama's going to have when they get in 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 3, that's where Milroe really becomes important.
No, absolutely. Now, let's go across the country here for our circle us back to an SEC conversation here. So we got the Pac-12 title game on Friday night. Obviously, Washington with Michael Penix, Oregon with Bo Nix. Bring in Jayden Daniels, Heisman talk here, but do you think that Friday night Pac-12 championship game winner wins the Heisman in Chris Lowe's opinion? You think winner Washington, Michael Penix, Oregon, Bo Nix?
I've always felt that when it comes to the Heisman race, and I've voted for it for 25 plus years now, if you're not playing on conference championship weekend, it hurts you. Now, I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but I think that's the way it is. And Jayden Daniels, and I've already sat down and done a lot of my homework. I never vote until after the conference championship games. He's been incredible what he's done, the number he's put up in a league that defensively at the SEC produces year in, year out tons of great defensive players. All you got to do is turn on the TV on Sunday and watch all the defensive players playing on Sunday who played in the SEC.
Yeah.
Well, I have the utmost respect for what Jay's done this year. But I do believe, and I can't speak for all the voters, that so many people are going to watch that game this weekend, the Pac-12 game. And again, Nix and Penix have both had incredible seasons. They're playing against each other. There's going to be a lot of eyes, as I said, on that game. So, yes, I believe if one of these guys plays lights out and they win, it's going to be a really close race between whichever quarterback that is and Jayden Daniels. I think it's a three-person race. It's one of those two quarterbacks out in the Pac-12 or Jayden Daniels. And you know what? I mean, I've had some people roll their eyes when I've said this. Everybody's definition of what the Heisman Trophy is or what it isn't is probably different. Is it truly the best player in the country? Is the player that played the best that year?
Mm-hmm.
If someone asked me right now, Chris, who's the best player in the country? It'd be number 19 in Georgia. I think Brock Bowers is that good. Now, he's not going to win the Heisman, but he is. I think if you ran 10 or 12 guys, Dave, out on the playground right now, and you're going to play a football game, and you said, all right, Chris, Dave, you can have the first pick. I bet you 10 out of the 12 people that are picking the teams would take Brock Bowers number one.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100% on that. Now, I'm going to ask you again, Chris, you're one of the more respected college football writers around the country. I'm going to ask you straight up here. Do you think there's a real shot? Let's just say, obviously, if Georgia wins on Saturday, they're in the playoffs. Do you think there's a real shot? Let's just say, obviously, we go scratch here. We go Michigan wins. You have Texas wins. You have Florida State beats Louisville. And let's just say Oregon beats Washington. I know everybody's having this conversation. And Alabama beats Georgia. Do you see where there is a real possibility that the SEC gets left out of the last 4-team college football playoff?
I'll answer it this way. I know some folks there inside the SEC office secretly, privately, behind closed doors are probably rooting for Georgia. I mean, there's real concern there that if Bama wins, that the head-to-head factor, if Texas does indeed beat Oklahoma State, is just going to be too much for the committee to ignore. Even though it depends on what side of the fence you sit on. Even though Bama would have won 11 in a row and be the SEC champs and would have the best win in college football in 3 years, I don't think you can get past the fact that Texas beat them by 10 points on their field, even though it was week 2. You just can't forget like that game didn't take place. And I think that's ultimately in your scenario what would cost Alabama. Now, like you said, if Florida State wins, if Michigan wins, if Alabama wins, Texas wins, but if Oregon were to beat Washington, and then they both have a loss, then it gets maybe it's a better shot for Bama to get in that scenario. We'll see. But I think Bama's strength of schedule would help them in that particular scenario.
No, I'm with you. I honestly think Bama has a better shot when comparing resumes and the eye test against Oregon. I'm like, I don't know how you can put them in over Texas. It's just why we're playing the game if you don't put them in. So I think Bama's best shot is you're comparing them to a one-loss Pac-12 champ Oregon, or even, I mean, Chris, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Would you judge Florida State on who they are now, or the 12 or the 13 game season if they beat Louisville, factoring in Tate Rodemaker playing at quarterback and not Jordan Travis?
Well, they're supposed to rule that. That's supposed to be a factor, that if you lose a key player and you do not play, not simply losing a player, but if you lose one and you do not play as well without that player, that's supposed to be a factor, much like it is in the NCAA basketball tournament selection process. Florida State didn't play great against Florida. That is a rivalry game. We'll see how that shakes out against Louisville. But if they were to play poorly on offense and squeak out a win, even though they're unbeaten in the ACC, I still think that committee would take the path of least resistance and put Florida State in. Is that the right thing? Does that ensure you get the best 4 teams? See, I've never thought it was the best 4 teams. I know that's what they say. It's the 4 teams that they can make the best case for should be, based on what happened that season, should be in the playoff. Because if you put, you coach, if you put 15 coaches in that room and said, all right, here's your assignment, pick the best 4 teams in college football right now to play in this playoff, I guarantee you it would look a lot different than it has over the last few years, because they're going to look at tape. They're going to look at strengths and weaknesses. They're going to say, who do I least want to play right now? We're getting ready to play in a month. Who do I least want to play because of X, Y, and Z? And that's different than who the 4 teams that you can make a case for based on their resume should be in there. And I'm not saying that's a warped way to look at it. I'm just saying I think that's the way that's the way it happens, is you look at who you beat, what you are, what your record is. And conferences aren't created equal, schedules aren't created equal. But going back to your initial question, man, if I'm sitting on that committee, and I think Alabama has improved as much as any team in the country, and I think Nick Saban's done an unbelievable job. But if you put that Texas team as a Big 12 champion up against a one-loss Alabama team, even though they would have beaten Georgia, I just can't get past the fact that Bama beat them head-to-head on their field. And you know what? In basketball, you play teams 3 or 4 times sometimes a year. In football, you don't. It's one time, and that's got to count for something.
No, you're 100% right. And I was even thinking here, there'd be a case to me, I think you mentioned, if you put a bunch of coaches in that room, I think if Alabama were to beat Georgia this week, I think a lot of those coaches would still put Georgia in the top 4. I'll be honest with you. I bet Alabama's like, we wouldn't want to see Georgia again. I don't want to see them again in the Final Four. I'd love to, but realistically, I think they're a top 4 team. And before we move on real fast, Chris, what do you think the line would be, that opening playoff game? If it's number 1, say Georgia beats Alabama, they're in. Florida State's the 4 seed with Rodemaker as the quarterback. What do you think that opening line is in that college football playoff game? 17?
I was going to say somewhere between 10 and 14. Yeah. Probably, maybe closer to 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
With the backup quarterback. And the fact that, Georgia's been on that stage so many times. This would be new for Florida State. Kirby and his staff have been there. So, I would say closer to 14 than 10 or 17 would probably be my guess. I wonder what it would be if Alabama. What if it's Alabama? Let's say it's Alabama and Florida State. What would it be? It may not be 14 or 17, but I bet it's darn close to 10 points.
I'd go 9.5, 10. I'm with you. I think it'd be closer to double digit. Yeah, Florida State, with what they're currently sitting at, is probably going to be a double-digit underdog against really anybody they play in that college football play. Even Michigan, if they're the 4 seed. Florida State's the 4 seed, Michigan's the 1 seed. But, Chris, I saw 2 more questions before we get you out of here again. ESPN's college football senior writer Chris Lowe joining us. Chris, I saw before we got on, you actually started breaking some news for some potential. You're hearing the 2024 schedule dates. What are some notable ones just off the top of your head you're noticing where they're kind of lining up on the schedule? I saw some Alabama's playing they're going at Oklahoma the week before the Iron Bowl next year.
Yeah, I think the big one is Georgia and Bama playing in September. So we're going to have to wait less than 10 months to see these guys go at it again next year. That'll be one of the more. Yeah, that'll be one of the more anticipated regular season matchups in the last couple of years in college football. These teams just don't play in the regular season. I think this will be the 5th time they've met in the regular season in the last 2 decades.
Yeah,
teams have dominated. Yeah, they've dominated the sport for much of the last. I think what have they combined for? Was it 5 of the last 8 national titles?
The last 8. Last time they played the regular season was 2020, the COVID year.
COVID year, and that was weird because fans weren't allowed in the stands. So I think you go back to what,
'07, the
16?
last time they were in Bryant. I
Yeah.
was at that game. The year Stafford to Mikey Henderson. I think they beat Alabama in overtime.
That one
Saban
stands
scores too.
out. I think Texas and Texas A&M planned to end the season on a Saturday. Typically, that game was on Thanksgiving or Friday before, so I'm sure that's probably I bet it's a Saturday night there in
Yeah.
College Station. So that's one that jumps out at me. I'm glad to see some of the traditional dates staying the same. Alabama and Tennessee are going to play on the third Saturday in October. Um, LSU and A&M are going to play earlier. They've been playing the last
Last game of the year.
decade or so on Thanksgiving weekend. That's going to go back to an earlier game. Georgia plays at Texas in October. I think it's October 19th. I don't have the dates in front of me, but that game in Austin will be one that I promise you I'd like to have about 10 tickets to that because I can make a lot of money. The Dogs going to Austin to play there. And I think that coincides, if I'm not mistaken, with that Formula One racing weekend when they
Shoot,
play there
man, that'll be a big weekend.
in October in Austin. And Alabama's closed the season. In November, they play LSU and Oklahoma on the road, and then they come back home to play Auburn in the Iron Bowl. So, man, that's going to be a harrowing finish for the Tide next year. And I think the Oklahoma game is the next to last week because it means you got Oklahoma Auburn in back-to-back weeks.
That's what I saw in your artists the week before the Iron Bowl. Yeah. And I see every SEC team, SEC fans always say, we got the hardest schedule. I see Florida's brought up a lot, but it's really everybody next year. All the Blue Bloods, I mean, they did it right. They matched they got all the Blue Bloods traditional teams against each other that first year in the league. I mean, you knew
there won't be any easy schedules next year. With OU and Texas joining the league, and remember, next year's a one-year deal.
Yeah,
they're going to try to come up with a more permanent format after that. A lot of that depends on whether they go to 9 conference games or stay at 8. The new format, though, and talking to some folks in the SEC office this weekend, will ensure that you play in a 4-year window. You will play every team in the league home and away one time. So if you're a player at LSU and you stay 4 years, you're going to play every team in the league at least once at your place and their place, which to me is a lot better. I love the rivalries. I love the fact that Auburn and Georgia play every year, and Tennessee and Alabama. But I hate the part I hated about the schedule in SEC is you have these long stretches where teams didn't play. And case in point, Georgia, A&M's been in the league since 2012. Georgia's never played at Kyle Field.
no.
And that to me is just – and I'm not dissing on Georgia A&M, but that's just not representative of what a conference is supposed to be.
I also feel like you never saw Auburn, Florida, really. It was always here and off. They didn't play really a ton. Georgia, Ole Miss didn't really play a
Alabama.
lot. Georgia, Alabama. I mean, you just talked about that. Georgia, Alabama never played a lot. Right? So I'm with you. I like that every kid will get a chance to play home and away against every team in the league. I know Saban's been a big proponent of that for a long time. But last question, Chris, before we get you out of here, a little nostalgic for you. It is an end of an era for the SEC. Really, we added Missouri and Texas A&M in 2012. CBS's TV contract with the SEC is up. They're moving on to the Big Ten. What are just your top 2-3 memories you got going back the last 10, 11 years of this league before we transition to a totally new SEC?
Yeah, I'll start with this. I think in that span, that 10-year span, and I know everyone's going to disagree with this, the 2 best teams I saw were LSU in 2019, just incredible. I don't know that I'll see an offense led by Joe Burrow is any more explosive than that one. They were unstoppable. And then I think the next year, Alabama. Now, that's a weird year. 20 was always going to be one of those years as we look back on college football that's, it's just so odd. You're playing in empty stadiums and practice was, you didn't have spring practice. But, boy, again, that team, Alabama, Devontae Smith and all those cats on offense and defense, those 2 teams, as I think back to those 10 years, I would love in a fantasy world to see those 2 teams play.
Yeah.
That 19 LSU team and that 20 Alabama team, because they both were just loaded with NFL players. I think the play, and maybe this is a little bit of medicine for Auburn, but the play that will always stick out for me during that span was the kick six.
Yeah.
And seeing Chris Davis racing down the sideline for a touchdown and Auburn winning that game, going on to the national title game 13. And, the play the other night was incredible, too. Jalen Milroe on 4th and 31. Hard to believe it's 10 years after the kick six, but
Same deal.
For forever, they'll be talking about both those plays, but the kick six is, I think, back to single plays in the league over the last few years would be right up there. And I think the run that Saban's had, I know everybody says, well, Kirby's passed him. And listen, if Kirby goes on to win 3 straight, which they may very well do, I don't know that, we're going to see that anytime soon in our lifetime. But the consistency that Alabama has played with under Nick Saban, they've had 13 straight 11-win seasons. Think about that.
Yeah.
At a time when the SEC's been as good and has dominated the national championship race like no other conference ever has, and yet they've won 11 plus in 13 straight seasons. I think both of those things, if Kirby wins 3 in a row, national titles, and Bama winning 13 or having 13 straight years of 11-win seasons, I just don't see us seeing that. Maybe I'll live to be 120. I don't know, probably not, but I don't think we'll see that certainly in my lifetime.
Well, Chris, man, you gave us a lot of good stuff. You're one of the best out there. I appreciate you hopping on with us today, man. We got a big week coming up, but yeah, I appreciate you hopping on, man. Appreciate you taking the time.
It's great to do it. Always good to talk some football with it. Have a great night.
Hey, you too. Appreciate you, Chris.